individuals, not actual participants in the meeting, to be able to view it. So Sheriff, I'll give you the thumbs up once it's going live. Matter of a few seconds here, and then you could go ahead and start the meeting. I would like to remind everybody too that when you're not speaking, if you could please mute your microphones. We tend to get a lot of feedback during the meetings. So if you could do that, that'd be great. Okay, Sheriff, we're live and set to go. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 254th meeting of the Municipal Police Training Council, being held virtually once again. I would ask that we all rise, and Dr. McBride, if you would lead us in the pledge of the flag, and then we'll remain standing for a moment of silence. Thank you. Dr. McBride, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you'd all remain standing for a moment of silence in memory of those that have served in public safety that have lost their lives. And given we're 2 days away from Memorial Day, all those military and soldiers who have given their life for their country and sacrifice. Thank you all. Okay, once again, I appreciate Josh doing all the introductions. We still have 4 vacant positions on the council. We have 4 members here today, which is qualifying as far as voting goes, even voting on the Part 6000 issues. We're okay to go ahead with that today. I do want to remind each one of the council members, Chief Parisi, Dr. McBride, and Dr. Clofus, that we have to, by regulation, we have to do separate votes because we are virtually on each one of the actions or the motions that we take today. And so I will be soliciting those individual votes once motions are made and motions have been read. And so I just want to make sure we all understand that again. We have quite a bit on the agenda today, and I appreciate everyone. We had to start at 11 o'clock today, and so we'll get right to it. I would entertain that a motion to adopt the agenda that's before us. There's 6 action items, and there's a couple of items for informational purposes. Would someone make that motion?
I'll make the motion. Chief Parisi, so moved.
Motion by Chief Parisi, second.
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Dr. Clofus, thank you. It's now time to vote. Chief Parisi, your vote?
Yes.
Dr. McBride?
Yes.
Dr. Clofus?
Yes.
And my vote is yes. The adoption of the agenda is approved. We now move to the minutes that were sent out previously for the 253rd meeting back on March 3rd of 2021. I don't see any issues with those minutes unless someone else does. I'll make a motion that they be approved. I would entertain a second.
So moved.
Okay, second, Dr. McBride. Let's vote on that. Chief Parisi,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes.
Dr. Clofus,
Yes.
and my vote is yes as well. The 253rd meeting minutes are hereby approved. We'll now move into some action items for this morning. Kevin Boehm is going to talk about recognizing cannabis for the Impaired Motorist Training Course, which is a new course being offered here. Kevin, go ahead with your presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. This program is designed to enhance the skills of the officer to detect a cannabis impaired motorist. Upon the review of we're going to review the standardized field sobriety test because that's the basis of all impaired driving investigations. And then we're going to talk about contemporary issues with marijuana, the different types of marijuana, along with the differences between recreational cannabis, medical cannabis, and hemp. The program breaks down the vehicle and traffic stop, along with introducing possible impairment cues for the motorist, for the officer to take into account of what's going on in front of them. We are also introducing 3 additional tests on the lack of convergence, the modified Romberg test, and the finger to nose test. And all these tests, along with the standardized field sobriety test and their observations of the motorist, helps them to conclude if the person is impaired by cannabis or by alcohol. Under no circumstances is this course to take to replace a ride. This enhances the officer's ability, and that it makes them better prepared for when they do sign up and take a ride. In section 1 is your introduction and orientation. Explain the overall goals of the course and explain to them what they have to do to successfully complete the course. They can't miss, it's standardized, can't miss more than 10%, and they have to perform, they have to be able to perform proficiencies for 3 new tests. Section 2, quite obviously, is we're reviewing the standardized field sobriety testing. Those are your horizontal gauge nystagmus tests. We're also talking about medical assessment of medical impairments while they're doing these tests. We talk about the different types of nystagmus, and the instructors will demonstrate the 3 standardized field sobriety tests, reiterate and supporting the directions that are needed for an individual to participate to perform these tests for the officer. The effects of the cannabis on the human body. We talk about the different types of cannabis, smoking, edibles, and how each one of them travels through the body and how they affect the human body. Quite obviously, if you smoke it, it's quick, it travels through the lungs and it gets to the brain. If you eat it, it travels a different route, but it still gets to the brain. And then we look for indicators that the subject is under the influence of cannabis. Okay, can we do contemporary cannabis issues? We're going to talk about different types of cannabis, different ways that people consume it, and explain the significance of the changes in the cannabis since the 70s, where most of us, when I started on the job in 75, it wasn't as potent as it is today. And we also talk about how individuals are able to increase the potency of the THC in the cannabis. Legal issues, but obviously there's a lot of issues that have been changed with the new law. But we talk about defining the drug pursuant to the New York State Vehicle and Traffic Law. We also have to talk about the elements that the officers have to meet to charge an individual with driving while impaired by cannabis, because it's a separate act now. And we have to explain the public health law as it pertains to cannabis. And we're also going to talk about medical marijuana, or the Compassionate Care Act, as in comparison with the legalization of cannabis. Then we go into the phases of the vehicle and traffic stop. We break it down very similar to the driving while ability impaired or driving while intoxicated. We have phase one. What are we looking for? Then we go into phase two, when we make contact to the motorist. What are we looking for there? And helps. It's just like any other criminal investigation. You got to start from a point and you build on that point. And then we introduced the 3 new tests: lack of convergence, modified Romberg test, and finger nose test. These tests are demonstrated via videos and by instructor in the classroom. And then each officer must demonstrate their proficiency in the 3 new tests. I think that's about it. Do you want me to read these, or?
No, you don't have to read the motions, Ken. Thank you. Is that it on your presentation?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, thank you. I wondered, could you tell us a little bit about the 2 pilot sessions you had in May and feedback on that?
Oh, the pilot sessions we had with May were restricted to SFST instructors and DREs. And the feedback was great. We got a lot of additional information back from them, which were incorporated into the manual. They were very helpful in other resources, pointing out you could look at, this research shows this research shows that. So they were a great amount of help with this program.
On the handout, Ken, it talks about 7.5 hours, and then the course itself, and then it talks about 7 hours in one of the motions. I just want to make sure we understand that the difference.
Well, it's a 7.5-hour course, sir. I cannot. It must be a typo on one of the.
Kevin, I can jump in here.
All right.
Before the council considers the motions, Sheriff, I can answer specifically to your question. This course, recognizing the cannabis impaired motorists, is designed to be a 7.5-hour standalone in-service course, taught by SFST instructors and also DRE instructors and DREs who have general topics as well. Now, what we also would like to do is incorporate this component, this standalone in-service course, into the basic course for police officers as well. It is a 7.5-hour course at the in-service level. We're recommending to the council to adopt only 7 hours of the 7.5 hours into the basic course for police. And the reason being is that 0.5 hours, that half hour, is a SFST review. And recruits would have had SFST training in the academy. So the review portion isn't necessarily mandatory for a recruit. Now, at the in-service level, that review component is critical because it might have been some time since they've had refresher training in regards to SFST. And as Kevin mentioned, this course, the training it's all about building a case. And it all stems on the foundation of understanding SFST for an intoxicated individual and delivering those tests, and then building upon that further. So that review is critical at the in-service level. However, it's not critical at the basic course level because they would have just gotten over 3 days worth of SFST training at the recruit level. So that's why you're seeing the difference in the 0.5.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. So then if I heard you right, this will be an additional 7 hours into the basic police course right now, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
And the logical delivery would be SFST training and then the recognizing the cannabis impaired motorists.
okay. All right, thank you. Does any council a member have any questions for Ken or Josh?
Sheriff, this is John Close. I have one quick question, I guess. Can you hear me?
Yes.
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 No, my question really is, it seems to me that the legal issues here are unfolding and changing dramatically. And I'm just wondering whether you consider putting the legal issues at the top of the curriculum rather than burying it down lower. Since those I think are going to continue to be confusing to a lot of people.
We thought about that earlier, but we're trying to connect the investigative techniques and the legal issues and build off of that.
Let's see.
And that way they understand what cannabis is, how they increase the THC level, the cannabis impairment on effects on the human body. And then we go into legal issues and build off of that to the next part of the 3 new tests and using the cues of possible cannabis impaired motorists.
Thank you for that.
Okay, any other questions for Ken or Josh?
This is Bruce McBride. This is a practical question, and very often when you stop somebody, there's polydrug use involved, starting with alcohol, and then you find out that there's also cannabis because there's odor in the car, etc. Did that kind of discussion come up with the group that was reviewing this course?
Yes, it did. We talked about it and used their information to build off of it.
Okay. And so you would go first for the alcohol, or would you go with cannabis, or both, or what was the general idea?
We would do, well, first of all, we would do the alcohol, then we go into the cannabis, but we may just go into the cannabis because there may not be any indications of alcohol.
That's correct, right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Just a clarification, is Natasha, are you on the line, Natasha, where I could ask you something?
Here.
Natasha, if do you want each one of these motions voted on separately, or could we read off all 5 motions and then do a vote?
I mean, if you want to do that, being that they're basically all the same topics. It's about cannabis. We could do that as long as it's not going to be where no one's going to agree there or have any abstentions anywhere. I would clean, 1, 2, what motions are there? 4, clean 4 motions. I'm fine with that.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Would one of the members go ahead and move the motions and read each one of them individually, and then we'll vote on all 5 motions at the end. Unless there is an issue, then we'll go back and do it separately. Go ahead, one of you.
I would. I'd move to. I'd move to read through them all and then vote on them all at once.
Okay, go ahead, John.
Okay. Motion 1, approve recognizing the cannabis impaired motorist course topics, hours, and instructional objectives as the minimum standard of instruction of the recognizing of the Recognizing the Cannabis Impaired Motorist course. Want me to keep going?
Yes, keep reading.
Motion 2, approve the issuance of Mptc certificates to the students that have completed the pilot sessions on May 13th, 2021 and May 27th, 2021, and the Recognizing the Cannabis Impaired Motorist course. Motion 3, amend the basic course for police officers and campus public safety officer course to include all topics, hours, and instructional objectives of the Recognizing the Cannabis Impaired Motorist course, with the exception of the standardized field sobriety testing review section, 5 hours. The minimum hours for instruction required will be 7 hours. Motion 4, require all instructions approved to deliver the course, including during the basic course for police officers and campus public safety officer course, to be certified as a DWI detection and standardized field sobriety testing instructor by the Municipal Training Council and successfully complete the Recognizing the Cannabis Impaired Motorist course. Individuals certified as a drug recognition expert instructor and individuals who are drug recognition experts and also certified as a general topics instructor by the Municipal Police Training Council are not required to successfully complete the Recognizing the Cannabis Impaired Motorist course. Motion 5, all employees and academies conducting the basic course for police officers or equivalent and the campus public safety officer course beginning on or after January 1, 2022 must utilize the newly approved curriculum.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a second to all 5 motions?
Second.
Oh, Dr. McBride seconds. Does anyone object to voting on all 5 motions? Okay, hearing no objection, we have all 5 motions have been moved and seconded. Dr. Clofus, your vote.
Yes.
Dr. McBride, your vote.
Yes.
Chief Parisi. Chief Parisi, your vote.
Yes.
And my vote is yes as well. All 5 motions are hereby approved. And thank you, Kevin and Josh, for your information on that. The next item on the agenda is recording custodial interrogations, the update to the model policy. And Josh, you're up.
Thank you, Sheriff and Chairman. Very, very brief. This is a relatively minor update to the recording custodial interrogations model policy. And I did mention it at the last meeting, so I won't bore you with all the details, but as a quick reminder, back in 2017, the CPL was amended, 6045, specifically subsection 3E, that required recording of interrogations to be consistent with rules established by DCJS, and DCJS adopted the Mptc model policy as those standards and rules. In that model policy, there were delineated specific instances when an individual would have to be recorded during the process of a custodial interrogation. The specific crimes were listed, and that included and applied to juveniles as well. Those were mandatory recordings that had to occur regardless if the individual was considered adult or juvenile. Back in December, the governor signed a bill, which was provided to you in your packet, requiring which amended the Family Court Act and required that the entire interrogation of a juvenile be recorded regardless of the specific offense. In response to that, on page 5 of the recording custodial interrogations model policy, an amendment has been made to reflect that change in the Family Court Act that requires all custodial interrogation of juveniles be recorded in its entirety. And that's regardless of the crimes, the qualifying offenses that are specifically denoted in Roman numeral 3 of the model policy on page 2. Those would obviously apply to adults, but for juveniles and consistent with the Family Court Act, all interrogations are to be recorded. An important note to make on this, this is effective November, my apologies, November 1st, 2021, this takes effect pursuant to what's in the statute as the requirement. So that is the only change we're suggesting at this time, to just clarify pursuant to the Family Court Act amendment that has been made to require all custodial interrogations of juveniles be recorded in their entirety. And those would be consistent with Family Court Act 305.2 and 344.2. Again, effective November 1st, 2021.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Does any council member have any questions of Josh? Okay, hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve this update to this policy.
I can do that.
Okay, is that you, Dr. Clovis?
Chief,
that was
Tim
not-
Parisi.
Oh, Chief Parisi. Okay, Tim, thank you. Okay, there's a motion by Chief Parisi. Do I hear a second?
I'll read it. I have to read it first.
Yeah, do I hear a second to the motion?
I'm happy to second it.
Okay, I have a second. Go ahead with your reading the motion, Tim.
Motion to adopt the proposed amendment to the Mptc recording of custodial interrogations model policy to require any custodial interrogations of juveniles be recorded in its entirety.
Okay, thank you. We have that motion in a second. We'll now, any further questions or concerns? Okay, hearing none, I'll now vote. Dr. Clovis, your vote?
Yes.
Dr. McBride, your vote?
Yes,
Chief Parisi, your vote?
Yes.
And my vote is yes as well. The update to the policy is hereby approved. Thank you, Josh. And next on the agenda is the de-escalation online training, which is action item number 4 on the agenda. Go ahead, Michael Puckett, go ahead. Josh, is Michael presenting this one?
He is, he might be on mute.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good morning.
yes.
Sorry. Remote here at the State Police Academy. They were gracious enough to give me some room. So but comes with some technical difficulties. Good morning, Chairman, members of the council. Presenting to you for approval a de-escalation in-service online training. This online training is designed for an in-service level to give a brief overview of what we believe de-escalation is, and not to give an entire say everything there is to say about the topic, but to give a brief overview and give us some techniques and tactics that might be useful. So I do want to give you I'm sorry, Josh, if you don't mind just going to the next one. We're just at a holistic approach to the training. I'll give you the learning objectives for the training and be happy to answer any questions. I believe that you have been, the video has been made available for you to see as well.
Which slide are you looking for, Mike?
If you just give me the learning objective slides and I'll read those, Josh. Thank you. Describe what is meant by a de-escalation in the context of a citizen-police encounter. Explain the importance of sound legal footing as it relates to the concept of de-escalation. Identify the important role that communication plays during any police encounter. List 3 communication strategies that can be used during an encounter in helping to turn down the temperature of that encounter. And explain the important role that competency with hard skills plays in the ability of an officer to devote attentional resources towards decision making. And additionally, there's related topics that we discuss, and we also provide additional resources because, like I say, 40 minutes isn't enough to talk about this topic as holistically as we would like. We provide additional resources, whether they be academy training, curricula, or at the in-service level for officers and agencies to seek out to provide more training, because our view of de-escalation is that it's a byproduct of successful training in essentially every other area, to include hard and soft skills that we would call. So I'd be happy to take any questions about the training, the video production that I believe that you've seen, or related topics.
Does anyone have any questions for Michael?
Bruce McBride, I thought the video was very well done. And could you describe how you basically put the crew together and the process that went through?
Sure, and I'm glad that you brought that up because it gives me an opportunity to give thanks to Eben Vaselli, our video guy. Really, the professionalism of the product, the final product, really is a testament to his skills, not mine. The first version wasn't nearly as polished, and that was representative of my skill set. But we talked about some of the ideas or concepts we wanted to touch upon when it comes to de-escalation. We really hadn't defined this, right? So we've been talking about this, whether it be in this meeting or in training environments or in the media. We've been talking about de-escalation for a long time, and what that we never really talk about what that means, right? And kind of it's almost a Rorschach test for how you view policing or how you view police training would be your definition of de-escalation. So we wanted to take the opportunity to define de-escalation, and then talk about now that we've defined it, what that means for policymakers, what that means for individual police officers, what that means for folks involved in police training. And so that was our goal here. I hope that that's what we conveyed, and definitely the message that this isn't the end of the conversation. This is just what we think de-escalation is. The conversation should continue to happen, and we should be continuously improving and striving for the outcome of de-escalation throughout police training, throughout policy making, and throughout our interactions with the public.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. You're welcome.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Yeah, that was a great job done on this. We all know that one of the objectives that came out of the police reform initiative was a need for this type of void to be filled across the state. You can pay for courses that cost a lot of money to have this type of training, but this is a great effort on everyone's part, and I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you, sir.
If I could add to that. Pardon me, Sheriff. If I can add to that, if you might not have had an opportunity, if you checked out the resource tab, there is a document in there that links to a list of resources, training curriculum that specifically address the point of the video. The video is basically boiling down to de-escalation is an outcome. It's the result of a well-trained officer with numerous skill sets, that recognizing that you can't train de-escalation in a standalone training. It's a well-trained officer applying various skill sets, as Mike mentioned, both hard and soft skills. And what we decided to do is, after that misnomer is addressed in the training, and we talk about some of the verbal and nonverbal communication skills that are available, there's additional resources that are provided to the viewer. It could be the training officer, it could be the executive officer, where they could go to and download additional training curriculum. Topics such as active bystandership, topics such as things as simple as officer wellness. We expect officers to handle these situations, but if their own wellness is compromised, that could potentially make issues. Use of force and other communication skills and emotional intelligence. There's a whole list of training resources that are available that have either been adopted by the Mptc, have been delivered by DCJS. Recently, the procedural justice training was adopted by the Mptc. That's in there. So there's a list of skill set resources that are available that build off of this short, standalone 40-minute video that basically just lays the foundation of what is actually de-escalation. So I just wanted to make sure that the council was aware that those resources are available in there.
Yes, thank you, Josh. Any other concerns or questions on this?
Bruce McBride, if this is offered for in-service training or online, do we, just remind me, do we issue a certificate of completion for this course?
Yeah, that's correct.
We
Sir.
would. Yes.
There's a link at the end of the training. Folks who complete the training would fill out the link. The training record would be updated, and then they'd be issued a certificate through Cannabis.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And with the adoption, if the council decides to adopt this online training as one of their approved trainings, the participants that complete the course would receive an Mptc certificate in their training record for completing the de-escalation online training.
Thank you.
Very good. Dr. McBride, do you want to make and read this motion?
Certainly. Do you want a second first, or just let me read the motion?
I'll do the second afterwards. I got ahead of myself before.
Okay, thank you. The motion reads as follows: adopt the de-escalation online training as an Mptc approved training course.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, Chief Parisi, thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Dr. Klofusz, your vote.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. McBride,
Yes.
Chief Parisi,
Yes.
and my vote is yes as well. So the approval of this online training for de-escalation is approved. Thank you, Michael, for the information on that and everyone's efforts. It's a very important thing you're doing. Thank you.
Chairman, I just wondered, where will the link be located to be able to, will it be on DCJS website or?
It'll be, we have a training document with resources. It's what we call a hidden link. So it's not publicly available by searching. But we provide the link to whoever asks for it, and they can take the training that way.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, very good. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is firearms instructor, the use of force update. Again, Michael, would you go ahead?
Yes, sir. So we have an existing firearms instructor course. The Office of Public Safety does have a plan to tackle a rewrite of the firearms instructor course in fairly short order. But in the meantime, we have a situation where we have an existing course written in 2000, and the use of force instruction is inconsistent with the training programs that we have in place, both at the basic course, in service levels, and also within the other instructor courses, RBT instructor and defensive tactics instructor. And so this is just really a stopgap measure until we have a chance to address the full course. And it's to adopt a new section 14 use of force instructional course for the firearms instructor that is consistent with that of the RBT and defensive tactics instructor. And so we would propose an adoption of a curricula that has 2 learning objectives, replacing the 4 that are existing now. And so I'll kind of give you just an overview of what those 4 that we'd be replaced with, and then the 2 that we'd replace them with. So the current objectives are explain that at Penal Law Article 35 is the law on use of force in New York State. Describe the steps of the progression of force or force continuum. Describe the effect state and federal case law have on the law enforcement use of force, and describe the general considerations for an agency to use in the development of use of force policy. And in adopting this new curriculum, we would strike those. Those are no longer, in many cases, supported by other areas of curricula or by law, to be fair, and replace them simply with list the 3 Graham factors and describe the objective standard used to test the constitutionality of police use of force. And this is really just a drop in of the existing curricula on this topic from the reality-based training instructor course and defensive tactics instructor course, with some minor modifications that from those courses to better fit the firearms instructor course. So I'll be happy to take any questions on the rewrite or on some of the old instructional objectives and why those are inconsistent. But we did think it was important to address this so that we don't have two inconsistent pieces of training curricula out there, because one can only imagine how that could create some problems down the line for agencies in terms of discussing the training standards that they're training to.
Okay, thanks, Michael. For someone who's been around a long time like myself, it's hard to see that we're going to replace Article 35 and as not being one of the objectives. It's something that's been in practice for quite a while. What's your thoughts on that?
Sure, and this is something we wrestled with back in 2016, and I understand some of the consternation it causes. I also went to the academy and was trained solely on Article 35, and the problem is that is very difficult for officers as a decision-making model, and we're teaching a threshold for criminal liability as kind of that decision-making model for police officers. So it's important to know what constitutes that threshold for criminal liability, but I think there's a better way to have that conversation. And this has been, frankly, a challenge with some of the more experienced more seasoned police officers, I'll say. I don't want to say older, but this is becoming a challenge because we're changing the way that we view this. But I think when I have the opportunity to sit down and talk with trainers, with firearms instructors, and we have this conversation, and we've had it with 1,500 or so over the span of the past couple of years with these 2-day use of force classes, it's a good conversation. I think people get it. It's a better way to train. But I'll give you some consolation is that Article 35 may become much more important in the near future. So we may revisit this, but we're being guided by the law, and we're being guided by the science and decision making in what we're teaching now.
Okay, thank you. Does any other council member have any other concerns, or anyone else have any questions here?
I don't see the motions, but will this require current an update for current firearms instructors, or they'll just have to include this in their curriculum, or will they need like a refresher?
To stay current, they won't need a refresher, but there is no many of, I don't know, I can't give you a most or all of or plurality, but many of the firearms instructors in New York State, especially those that are active, have already been through our 2-day use of force refresher. So they'll be familiar with this material. But we'll, as we go through and create new firearms instructors, we'll be able to introduce them to this material. But again, most of them are. And as I finished speaking before, I hope that I answered Sheriff Spike's question fully. Sheriff Spike, we do discuss Article 35 in the new curriculum. It's not that we toss it aside. It is covered. It is discussed. It is, of course. The instructors need to understand it. They need to talk about it to their folks that they're teaching. But it's just not the core of what it used to be in terms of everything is discussed surrounding Article 35, because there's other considerations at play. We've weighted them more heavily.
Yeah, I did read where it is covered. It just just from an old timer to see that it's not one of the objectives was something I had to really process. And,
I understand, sir.
But I understand the Graham factors are the objective reasonableness and all that is so important, because we just kind of in our training now we say that over and over and over again, as you know. The other question I had was within the curriculum, it talks about the use of force continuum, kind of a step ladder effect, if you will, and I just wanted to make sure that that we emphasize that can go up or it can go down depending upon the actions of the suspect, I guess is a good way to put it. Is that's a possibility that it doesn't always just go up. It can go both ways.
Sure. You're risking getting an hour-long discussion from me on the use of force continuum, but just briefly, we don't teach a continuum per se anymore, because frankly, it's not supported in law. It was a training tool that was utilized to explain to officers use of force, really back before use of force was discussed in the constitutional sense, when agency policy really dictated what was lawful use of force and what was not. During the 80s, we had a Supreme Court addressed it several times: deadly force to prevent the escape of a fleeing felon, and then use of force in the context of an investigatory stop or arrest. And really, the continuums persisted in spite of those very, very important Supreme Court decisions. And we've had, like some folks probably have difficulty letting go of Article 35. We've had some difficulty letting go of these continuums, but frankly, they're not supported in law. And they're not great decision-making models either. But as far as what you say, they can, if you are to rely upon one, they can go up and go down. Of course, that's the case. One thing that this continuums can't do, and this is what we've seen this problematic issue pop up with respect to use of force, is they can't weigh the government's interest in being there in the first place. And you see this when it comes to mental health arrests versus criminal arrests, and the courts see these things very differently. But the use of force continuum doesn't make a distinction there. And you have a child that's in the throes of a mental health crisis. The use of force continuum really doesn't account for any of those things, and that's one major problem with the use of force continuum. So we do try and discuss use of force absent a use of force continuum. But if one were to use one, absolutely, we want to make sure that they understand that force that is reasonable must account for the fact that the proportionality essentially is what the word that's in vogue now, relies upon the government's interest in being there. And that interest can change throughout the course of an event.
Yeah, thank you, Michael.
Yes, sir.
Any other council member have any concerns or questions here? Any non-voting member have any concerns or questions? Okay. Would someone want to make and read the motion, please?
This is John Clofus. I'd be happy to. The motion is approve the substitution of the use of force section of the Mptc Firearms Instructor course.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second, Chief Parisi.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll vote. Dr. Clofus, your vote.
Yes.
Dr. McBride. Dr. McBride, your vote, please.
Stand by. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Chief Parisi?
Yes.
And I'll be a yes as well. That motion passes. And thank you, Michael, for your presentation and helpfulness with the questions. Appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you. And thanks to the state police for their hospitality. I do want to mention the assistant director of training for the state police and also some academy staff are here in attendance in the room as well. So I do want to mention not only their hospitality and allowing me some resources here to make this presentation, but also just continuously discuss the fact that we have a very positive working relationship with the New York State Police in the past few years. And I truly value that. I can walk into this building and I feel as at home in this building as I do in my own. And that's something I truly value. And I do extend my sincere thanks to the state police for that, because they've made that so.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you, Michael. Yeah, we truly value that as well with the NYPD as well, too. So thank you for saying that, Michael. Thank you. The next on the agenda is the professional policing regulations. The Commissioner, Mike Green, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. So the budget this year contained a portion that's been referred to as the Professional Policing Act of 2021. I'll give you just a brief summary and then talk about some specific areas. But the new statute requires all municipal police agencies in New York And it does clarify language that the NYPD is considered a municipal police agency. It requires all municipal police agencies to adhere to minimum hiring standards. It also directs the MPTC through regulation to outline what those minimum hiring standards are. In addition, it requires all municipal police agencies be subject, and again, including NYPD, be subject to the same minimum training standards established by the Municipal Police Training Council, and then dictates that all officers of municipal police departments that go through that training receive the same uniform MPTC training certificate, and also sets forth that that training certificate is subject to permanent decertification if an officer is removed for cause. On the hiring standards section in the materials, and I believe it starts at page 16, there are proposed amendments to Part 6,000 of the regulations, and those are MPTC regulations. Again, by statute, the statute dictates that MPTC will establish mandatory minimum hiring standards, which must include new standards for psychological evaluations, standards for lack of good moral character, and standards for background investigations to determine whether or not a candidate possesses good moral character. And all of that is set forth in the proposed regulation that's in the material. By October 16th of 2023, all agencies, municipal police departments must receive from the Law Enforcement Agency Accreditation Council a certification of compliance with the MPTC established minimum hiring standards, also with the required reporting of misconduct standards to the Attorney General's office under Executive Law 75, and compliance with registry reporting requirements under Executive Law 845, including reporting requirements around termination for cause. So basically, the Law Enforcement Accreditation Council, in addition to the existing accreditation program, which doesn't change and which is still voluntary, will also have to review those three areas I just indicated for every department and decide whether or not to issue a certification of compliance to that department. Any department that does not get a certification from the Accreditation Council indicating compliance in those areas will in effect lose its police powers because the definition of police officer under the criminal procedure law is now linked to the officers working for a department that has that certification from the Accreditation Council. On the training side, as I indicated, all municipal police agencies must comply with the MPTC training standards, and the revisions make clear that that does include the NYPD. On the decertification process, is the council, I believe, is well aware, starting in 2016 through regulation, there was a process put in place where training certificates could be revoked. That process, though, was based solely on local interpretation and reporting of an officer's removal for cause due to incompetence or misconduct. There have been many loopholes that were identified. I believe in 2017, there was some amendment to the regulations to try and close some of those loopholes, but others remained. You know, one major one was there's nothing to stop an officer who had been terminated for cause and lost their certificate from going back to an academy and obtaining another certificate. This statute does close that loophole. In addition to the new law, there are new proposed regulations in section 6056. Those regulations are not MPTC regulations. They're DCGS commissioner regulations. We are presenting those to the council for informational purposes, though, so those are also in your materials. right after the proposed amendments to Section 6,000 of the regulations. They do a number of things. They redefine removal for cause in Section 6056, and it focuses on specific conduct that triggers decertification when an officer is removed. So in the past, the regulations we had defined removal for cause around the process that was used for an officer to be removed. These new regulations focus instead on the conduct which caused the officer to be removed. Police departments will still initiate reporting based on local determinations as to why an officer was removed, and officers still retain all local due process rights. But once an officer has gone through those local due process rights or gone through that local due process and been terminated, departments are provided clearer guidance on what constitutes removal for cause. The new statute and regulations also require other state agencies with investigatory responsibility of police misconduct. So, for example, the Attorney General, the Inspector General, the MTA Inspector General, to report to DCJS on complaints, case status, and findings that they've made with regard to misconduct by police officers. The new statute and regulations also authorize the DCJS Commissioner to correct any material inaccuracies reported by an agency. However, this action can only be taken after the Commissioner gives notice to both the department and the officer involved and provides both of them with an opportunity to be heard. And that opportunity to be heard is spelled out as a hearing process in the new proposed amendments to 6056 of the regulations. As I indicated before, the new statute and regulations also allow for, they don't require, but they allow for permanent invalidation of an officer's training certificate when an officer is removed for cause. And that would prevent an officer from going through a new academy, getting a new training certificate, and continuing to work as a police officer in New York State. There are also changes. The statute dictates changes to both the makeup of the Municipal Police Training Council and the Law Enforcement Accreditation Council. As to the MPTC, the superintendent of the state police is now by statute a member of the MPTC. Previously, there were two chief representatives with no distinction as to what type of department they came from. The new regulations maintain two representatives of chiefs of police, but one chief has to be from a department of more than 100 officers. Previously, there were two sheriffs. The new regulations or new statute maintains the representation of two sheriffs, but requires that one of those sheriffs be from a department of more than 100 deputy sheriffs. There's a new representative representing victims of crime, a new representative representing a community with a high number of police community interactions. And then there's also a new representative from a peace officer employing agency or municipality, specifically geared at getting input specifically regarding peace officers. And then there's also a member that will be from an academic who teaches in the field of criminal justice. So with those changes, if my math is right, I believe that will take the membership of the MPTC to 10 members when it's fully staffed. With regard to the Accreditation Council changes in membership, there's, with regard to both the police chiefs and the sheriffs, the same situation where one chief and one sheriff now have to be from a department with more than 100 officers or more than 100 deputy sheriffs. And then they also add a representative of crime victims and a representative of community with a high number of police and community interactions. In terms of effective date, the provisions of the statute are effective 180 days after the bill is signed for all sections, except for the amendments which affect the mandatory certification process for all departments, which will be effective in 2 years. So that's a high-level overview. I'm happy to answer any questions or let staff answer any questions as may be appropriate.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate that overview. A lot going on in that regulations and that act, that's for sure. Does anyone on the council have any questions or concerns for the commissioner or staff?
Hi, Commissioner. Did you say that the statute outlines the misconduct definitions, or is there going to be a guide to that the MPTC has to formulate?
So that's in the regulations, and those regulations are not MPTC regulations. They're actually DCJS Commission regulations. And I think if you hold on a minute, I can give you the page number in the materials that you have.
I was looking at it while you were talking, trying to follow through, but I didn't find that. So
Yeah, just give me 1 second. So that regulation starts on, it says page 11 up at the top. As I've got it open in my Adobe Acrobat Reader, it says to me it's page 26 of 35. But on the, on the actual hard copy that's coming up, it says page 11 at the top. And that's where the changes to 6056 start. And then if you go down there, and just find the specific language. So it's on subparagraph H, number 1, and it reads misconduct includes, and then it goes to lay out all the different types of misconduct. So criminal activity, any felony offense, any sexual offense, any serious offense is defined in the penal law, crimes involving official misconduct, obstruction of public servants, bribery of a public servant, perjury, crimes involving forgery, crimes involving assault and menacing, dishonesty, and then dishonesty is specifically defined, excessive use of force, with that definition tied to the MPTC use of force policy, abuse, and then again, there's 3 subcategories there defining abuse. Again, focusing on sexual conduct on duty, conflicts of interest, constituting gross negligence or gross misconduct, and those are defined. So that will give you a flavor of what they're for, but it's page 13 as the page numbers are labeled on the top of the page. On my Adobe Acrobat, it's coming up as page 28 of 35.
Commissioner, I wonder if it would be helpful. Josh was going to walk the council through in a little bit more detail of these regs that you had just talked about at the high level, and I wonder if that would be helpful before any further questions. Obviously, the council can ask questions as they like, but it might be of assistance to them to get in that more in-depth coverage before we go further. It might just be a help to them.
It's fine with me as long as it's all right with the chairman.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you, Joanna.
Okay, great. Take it away, Josh.
All right. Thanks, Johanna. And thank you, Commissioner, for the high-level overview of the Professional Policing Act and the changes to the statutes and how they will impact law enforcement agencies. I want to specifically focus on, and Chief Parisi, this would probably answer your question, what you're looking at. I want to specifically focus on the regs for Part 6056, which is the Central State Registry of Police Officers and Peace Officers. And I also then want to focus on specifically Part 6000, which is the medical and physical fitness standards for police officers. I want to, even before I start that, I'd like to just first acknowledge that all the work that has gone into this with respect to what we're presenting to the council today on Part 6056 and Part 6000 has been the work of a huge team of staff making these recommendations to the council for changes in the regulations, amending the commissioner's regulations to align with the recent statutes that have been changed between executive staff, legal staff, managers in the registry and police training units. A lot of work has gone into this, a lot of input. So I say that because although I'm presenting and giving a high-level overview of these changes for the council's consideration, primarily for Part 6000, I want to just acknowledge that there's a team of people here on the call today who will be able to certainly answer many of the questions that you have, if you have any, as we go through the process. I'll do my best, but I encourage the team who's been part of this process from day one to certainly jump in at any point. So with that being said, I'd like to just give a high-level overview, and the commissioner touched on a lot of Part 6056, but just a very high-level overview of it. Again, first and foremost, these are commissioner regulations, so they do not require a council vote. But just like with many of the regulations, they'll still go through a comment period, a 60-day comment period for the public to comment on, to get feedback on. So although these are commissioner regulations and don't require the council vote, they'll still go through that regulatory process. 6056 is basically high level, is the regulatory framework for the registry, for the police and peace officer registry. And it also includes, as the commissioner mentioned, the certification process of a police or peace officer. One of the high level changes in 6056 is the commissioner's ability to correct inaccuracies in the registry. And I'll get into some of the other changes that were part of Part 6056, but then have been clarified and for agencies and officers for clarity purposes in terms of decertification and reporting removal for cause instances. So first of all, where is the statutory authority derived for these regulations? They come out of, first of all, 845-2B. It directs the head of an agency to immediately transmit to DCGS notification whenever an officer ceases to serve. So basically, reporting updates to DCGS regarding the registry has always been required. It's always been in regs and statute, but what was amended in part of the budget bill was to more clearly define in statute that it requires the immediate reporting by agencies when an officer ceases to serve. The second statutory authority that was amended in the budget bill was Executive Law 845-3B, and that's what I just mentioned earlier, is that it establishes, and the commissioner mentioned as well, it establishes authority for the commissioner to develop a hearing process if there's to determine accuracy of notification concerning an officer ceasing to serve. So basically, it establishes authority for the commissioner to develop the hearing whenever there's inaccuracies, potential inaccuracies for the agency and or the officer to have a hearing. And that hearing would probably be very similar to what we did, the Mptc did in an instructor revocation hearing. More details that come on that. And then finally, the last statutory authority statute that was amended requires, as the commissioner mentioned, requires that state agencies with investigatory responsibility, like the Attorney General's office, the IG's office, I believe the MTA, Inspector General's office as well, those who have investigatory responsibility of police misconduct to promptly inform DCGS on complaints, case status, and findings. So that's the statutory authority that then resulted in these proposed amendments to Part 6056. And getting into those amendments, and Chief Parisi, I think this specifically addresses your question, and as the commissioner went through the list, in your packets, labeled, beginning at page 11, as the commissioner mentioned, the definitions of Part 6056 begin, and specifically the definition for removal for cause has been completely redefined to add further clarity to the reg. So it further clarified that criminal activity, dishonesty, use of excessive force, abuse in terms of sexual nature, all these things will trigger a decertification, meaning a permanent invalidation of an officer's BCPO certificate. When an officer is removed by a police department, and police departments will still be required to initiate reporting, but these are providing much more clear guidelines and are less subject to interpretation. So 6056.2 is the definition for removal for cause and delineates the specific instances when an officer should be reported to DCGS for being removed for cause. Again, the individual has already gone through the due process hearing during the local process and has been separated from service for one of these removal of cause instances listed in 6056.2. Moving forward in 6056.4, that establishes the permanent invalidation of an officer's certification when they've been removed for cause. High level, again, as mentioned earlier, 6056.3 authorizes the commissioner to correct the registry that contains material inaccuracies. And 6056.7 allows an officer in the agency to challenge those corrections via hearing pursuant to 6056.7. And as I mentioned, this will probably take place in the construct of the Municipal Police Training Council, similar to an instructor revocation hearing. And then 6056.4 and 6056.5, these have already existed. Annual validation requirement has already been part of the regulatory process. But what was added here was language was added to further clarify that heads of agencies are required to verify statutorily training obligations are met by their officers, such as verifying that they've completed the basic course for police officers, and the removal of any officers from the registry to reflect that if they're no longer employed by the agency. Again, just clarifying language is being added to 6056.4 and 5. So that's a high level overview of 6056. Again, it summarizes a lot what the commissioner already spoke on. Those changes are specifically delineated and noted in your packet of information. Again, those are commissioner regulations. They do not require a council vote. They will go through the regulatory process for the 60-day comment period. But if there's not any questions, or if there are, we'll certainly take any questions regarding those. And then the next step of the process is to talk about Part 6000, which will require an Mptc vote. And I'll go in detail through Part 6000 for the council, but I'll hold off there and wait for any questions on 6056.
Josh, what did you say the number of days for the comment period is before it goes into effect?
I believe it's now 60 days.
Okay. Thank you.
You have 60 days, and then assuming there are no comments, we can go and adopt those. And it takes about 2 weeks after you put in your adoption papers for it to go into effect. But if we do receive some comments, depending on if we want to change anything or not, it may go through another comment period, another 45 days. But we'll see what happens when we cross that bridge. But as of right now, it's 60 days.
Did the 60 days already start to run, or does it start today, Natasha?
Has not started yet. Once you vote, we will submit the regs over to the regulatory review unit who reviews it. And then once they approve it, and everyone else across the street, it's, they will send it over to the Department of State for the public comment period.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions on 6056? Okay. On to part 6000, the medical and physical fitness standards and procedures for police officers. As you're very well aware, part 6000 is the regulatory framework for police hiring standards in regards to currently physical fitness and medical standards. The statute that was amended that now directs the council to establish rules and regulations for psychological requirements as well as background investigations has been amended in Executive Law 842 and 2B. Basically, 842 directs the council to promulgate psychological requirements, and then Executive Law 842B directs the council to promulgate background investigations to determine the eligibility of persons for provisional or permanent appointment in the competitive class of a police officer of any county, city, town, village, or police district. So again, these are non-governor regulations, but they still will require the council vote on this one. And they will go through the same regulatory process as 6056. And the effective date for these are October 16th, 2021. So I'm going to go through each in your packets for this action item, starting on page 2. I'll begin there and work our way through high-level changes to the regulations of Part 6000. First of all, throughout the entire document, the term entry level has been removed in all occurrences. First of all, entry level is not defined in Part 6000, and the removal of that also clarifies that these hiring standards of Part 6000 are not limited to just new recruit officers. They would include, standards that are a requirement of, for example, lateral transfers. The term his or her has also been removed in all occurrences of the document and has been replaced with non-gender specific, such as, individual, police officer, things like that in nature. Part 6000.1. This is the definition section of this particular regulation of Part 6000, and in there we define what a psychologist and psychiatrist is. Most typically, a psychologist is used to conduct a psychological assessment, and for an individual to practice in New York State, they must be certified in New York State to practice. And they also must be certified in the same state as the individual that they're providing services for. So a qualified psychologist or psychiatrist is meaning a New York State licensed individual to practice here in New York State. The Part 6000.2 provides an additional statement of purpose. It expands upon the statement of purpose that's already existent in the regs to expand upon the intent is for all police officers to be held to the identical hiring standards that are being set forth here. The goal here is to ensure, as the commissioner mentioned, that all police officers from any county, city, town, any municipality follows all the same similar hiring standards, and that this statement of purpose addresses that goal. Going on to the next, Part 6000.3. This particular portion of a reg identifies the order in which the physical fitness screening test must be conducted, the background investigation, the medical review, and then the psychological review. Basically, the pre-offer portion is the physical fitness portion and the background, and then the post-offer portion, the medical review and the psychological assessment would follow. And that's in compliance with the ADA, American Disabilities Act, and also follows the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission recommendations as well, with both of those. So 6000.3 identifies the order in which these tests should be administered. And then Jumping all the way to 6,000.9, when the medical and physical fitness standards were established, a job task, it was based on a job task analysis, and it listed the job task of a police officer in 6,000.9. And when looking through the job tasks, there was some language in there that was just frankly just outdated. So we are proposing to the council to amend that job task language. It's the same job task, just some more current or relevant language that's being used. So J, we're recommending that 6,000.9 subsection J be amended to read now, talk with a person attempting suicide to get them to stop the attempt. Originally, what was in there, it said or delay the attempt. We struck that language. We're also recommending to strike the language in section L to now read assist and take protective actions for persons in emotional crisis. Some of the language in there that was simply just outdated language from a previous job task analysis. Same job task, just reworded. Any questions? I've already gone through a significant amount already. Any questions yet? I'll keep moving along. 6,010. This is a completely new section to the Part 6,000. And this establishes the background investigation standards and procedures to determine good moral character of a candidate. This is what I referenced, the statute change in executive law that requires the council to establish hiring procedures to include background investigations. This section 6,000.10 addresses how those background investigations should be conducted, and also primarily identifies any automatic immediate disqualifications of a candidate where there are instances, specific instances of lack of good moral character occurring within 3 years of a job application. So any of those listed under 6,000.10, subsection 1, any of those instances where an individual lacks good moral character and they have occurred within the past 3 years of the candidate applying for the job would constitute an immediate disqualification. And then staying within that same section, subdivision 2 also then identifies indicators for an agency when they're conducting the background investigation, indicators of a lack of good moral character of a potential candidate that an agency may consider when determining if a candidate is unfit to serve. These aren't immediate disqualifications. However, these are indicators that an agency should consider when conducting the background investigation and determining whether the individual has good moral character. And then 6,000.10 also has a section that outlines the background investigation process and determining a candidate's moral character as part of that section. And then 6,000.11, this is also a brand new section, and this addresses the change in the statute requiring the council to establish psychological standards, hiring standards. So it requires, first of all, that a qualified psychologist or psychiatrist conduct the assessment. Most likely in most agencies would be utilizing a qualified psychologist, a psychologist licensed in New York State. They're deemed the most suitable and trained to conduct these types of assessments. And the qualified psychologist and psychiatrist, as I mentioned in 6,000.2, is defined earlier on. And then 6,000.11, this section identifies the components of the psychological assessment that must be conducted. It identifies what high level, what should be screened for. It requires the use of validated written tests. It requires the use of an interview process to be conducted by the psychologist. Once the results of the written test are scored, then an interview process by the psychologist will be conducted to interview the candidate. And then the psychologist would then also provide the agency with an assessment report and recommendation based upon the assessment of the results of the test and the interview process that's conducted. So 6000.11 establishes those psychological standards for hiring. So that is in a nutshell, a high-level overview of Part 6000 to address the statutory change in the executive law requiring the council to develop background investigation standards as well as psychological assessment standards. So with that, I know I went very quick, but I'll certainly open up any discussions, any questions regarding these standards. And I know that the team of DCGS staff, myself, are be willing to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. The only concern that I've heard goes back to your definition in 6000.1 on the qualified psychologist or psychiatrist, meaning that someone has to be New York State licensed. I know that there are agencies that are around our border of our 6 states that border New York that might utilize a psychologist or psychiatric person from the border state that's certified and approved by their civil service commission or their personnel officer at the time to do it that way. What we're really saying then, and my concern for those agencies that do that, are that they no longer can do that practice. They must use someone that's New York State licensed. And so the concern was whether that's an interpretation of the statute or if the statute actually says that or whatever. That was some of the concerns that I've heard. I don't know if you've had time to discuss that or not.
And state law requires that in order for an individual to practice as a psychologist in New York State, they need to be licensed. So and it also applies to out of state. So if there's a recruit in, say, Massachusetts, and I'm a licensed psychologist in New York State, I could not provide services to that individual in Massachusetts unless I'm certified in Massachusetts. And that works the other way as well. So if I am licensed in, say, Massachusetts as a psychologist, but I have a candidate who is in New York State, I would need to be licensed in New York State in order to provide psychological services recommendations to that individual. So how that outside testing is occurring, I do not know unless that individual is licensed also in New York State as well as the other state that they reside in. I can't speak to specifically to your concern to that, but otherwise I can explain, as I mentioned, that's the reason why we're requiring a New York State licensed psychologist.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I only know that previously those local commissions have approved that type of situation, and basically what we're saying now is that they no longer can do that if their commission has approved it, and I'm just a little concerned about how that may be received by some of the chiefs or sheriffs involved in that. They've always done it that way. They believe in a psychological examination, but that's the way they've done it. And I think they've done even virtual interviews, and that may not be acceptable either. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, virtual are being conducted as well as part of the interview process. But again, you would need to be licensed in that state to provide that particular service to that individual. One of the things to clarify is that the testing process, the exams, the assessment tools that are utilized, all are graded by some sort of computer application, and they use algorithms to determine the results for the exam that's given to the candidate. But and they might even come back with a detailed report, but that interview process is very critical for psychologists to have with the candidate. And it's critical for so many reasons. I'll give you one example. The assessment tool may come back and the individual may have answered one of the questions might be, have you ever thought about suicide? Or have you ever thought about committing suicide? The individual may answer yes to that question. But the reality is they were watching a TV show and it was a show and it had a scene of a suicide, and the individual thought about it and said, geez, I would never think about doing that. Well, they answered truthfully to the question, and that may come out on the computer software, the application as, that's a red flag. But without a psychologist, or without having that interview of the psychologist who's trained to ask questions and trained to ask these follow-up questions to dive deeper into these discussions with a candidate, that could have resulted in the candidate being removed, and potentially a good candidate being lost because simply, he or she or they thought they answered the question correctly. And it's like, no, I thought I was answering correctly, but this is what I meant. Talking with other psychologists, they've seen many instances where that has occurred. So that's a very important process. But there's other parts too where things might not come out. It's tests are limited in many areas. So there's certain things that you can't clear test questions on that you can't get a clear reading on until you have an actual interview with that person to dig deeper into some of the results of the test, or to further probe into that process. And that's a nationwide standard best practice, is to have this interview process with the psychologist as part of this. And again, that process.
Josh, it's Johanna. I just wonder if I could, and Chairman, I wonder if this would be helpful. Josh, do you think you could share a little bit about how we came up with these standards, what was included in this, and some of the prior work of the Mptc and how it educated and contributed to this regulatory framework?
Sure. And again, this goes back to around 2008, 2009, when the council started taking on model policies. One of the very first model policies that the council took on was the psychological exam process, the assessment process, to provide agencies some guidance if they're conducting psychological exams of candidates. Now, at the time, obviously Part 6000 did not require psychological assessments to be done. So, but we recognize that a lot of agencies were doing this, and to provide them further guidance in conducting these, the council took on the task of developing a detailed document of how to do this process from basically A to Z, even to the point of selecting the appropriate psychologist, doing your own background check and homework on them, verifying that they are indeed had no disciplinary actions taken against them, knowing what questions to ask, knowing that the interview process with the psychologist and the chief of the agency is just as important to determine the goals of the agency, the culture of the agency, so the psychologist understands the type of recruit, the candidate that the agency is looking for, and to have that one-on-one dialogue to make sure that they're getting the right candidates as part of the process. So the council developed and adopted these standards, and what we basically did is said, these standards exist. We talked with other psychologists and other agencies, and they said that these standards that were developed, although they were almost 10 years old or so now, they are still just as relevant, still best practices today. So we took those standards that agencies have been using as a best practice document and added those to the current regulations so that they mirrored what was in the guidance document that we were providing agencies for many years now, and agencies have been utilizing. So a lot of the guidance shouldn't be relatively new to agencies. It's been out there for a while now. We've shared it with agencies. So it was basically, a lot of this was a cut and paste from what was in the guidance document to these regulations. Hopefully that answers your question, Johanna, what you were asking.
Yeah, and I just think one of the things that you did mention, Josh, that I think is helpful to know is that even though it was done in 2008, we had conferred with some of the psychologists and psychiatrist experts who were involved in that panel then to confirm that this is still the best practice, and that in fact they reviewed it and have confirmed that this is still the best practice. So I thought it might be helpful, Chairman, to make sure that you to remind the council as to some of the history behind how we got to those guidance and how they were helpful in us getting to this point.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I know that I, for one, follow that with our own agency, that's for sure. I just know that there are other agencies, both chiefs and sheriffs, that have been allowed by their Civil Service Commission to do a little bit different procedure that way with either an adjoining state or out-of-state type of thing. So I understand. I thank you for the explanation. Appreciate it. Are there any other voting members of the council that have any questions or concerns about this Part 6000?
Bruce McBride, most of these standards seem to be best practices, as you mentioned before, that have been developed over the years. Are there any ones that would have an impact on municipalities, cities, towns, and villages that we know about? I'll give an example. I know there's some agencies that don't do a polygraph, and now the polygraph is required.
I can speak to it to start with, and then if anyone else wants to jump in. I think you're right. I think most, if not all, larger agencies do polygraphs. My understanding is there may be some smaller ones that don't. So there's no question that would be an added expense. There are a lot of options. There's shared service arrangements. There's other options that can be pursued. I think it really comes down to, the basic question around professionalism and what's the floor, that people expect from the profession. We're giving people guns and badges and high-powered cars and sending them into some of the most dangerous situations that we have in our society today, and expecting good outcomes. And so, it's a real fundamental question of, as a profession, what's the floor? And at some point, it's going to cost money. And so, yes, there's a policy decision here that, given the things that we're asking police officers to do, and the stresses that they're under and the situations that they face, I think the policy call here was, that this is one of those things. It's just, it costs money to run a police department. It costs money to run a good professional police department, and this is one of those areas that collectively we're going to have to figure out how to do it. Because the policy call is that this is, as a state, what we expect at a minimum. Now, that was something we talked a lot about, and I think there are some compromises in here, if I have read these correctly, and Josh or someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think every time a department hires, I think if someone is an existing officer and, for example, is hired through an equivalency, and they've had a psychological when they were originally hired, and they left in good standing and weren't removed for cause, I think that the department has the ability to hire that person without doing a new psychological exam, given the way these are written. But, for a new officer, just the policy call was, that this is what we expect as a state.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions or concerns?
And really, maybe it was stated, these regulations are statutorily driven anyways. They're best practices to abide by the statute or the regulations that are in place.
Yeah, they are definitely statutorily driven. The statute specifically directs Mptc to pass regulations in this area. And, I think that goes back to a point that both the chairman and I have discussed in the past in other areas, and that is, I think it's a compliment to the MPTC that the legislature and the governor's office, continue to look to the MPTC and in fact defer to the MPTC, to put the detail around these statutes. The legislature could have tried to draft all of this into the statute. I certainly wouldn't encourage that. I think it's a much better process that they leave these details to the MPTC, through regulation. And I think, this is just me opining, but I think some of the reason they do that is because they've seen the work that the council has done in the past, and see the quality of the work the council has done, and they have confidence in the council. So I think in that regard, it's a compliment to the council that they've specifically put in statute that it's the MPTC, that establishes these regulations.
Yep. Thank you. Any other concerns or questions? Any other concerns from any of the persons that are participants in this call?
Sheriff, this is Tom Mitchell from the Sheriff's Association. Are you taking any questions from guests?
Well, we've taken questions from all the councils, so now I would go to any other questions that may be of concern at this point. So yeah, go ahead, Tom.
I just want to note that our association has been working with both the Department of Civil Service and the group known, I believe, as the Personnel Directors of the New York State in consequence of the 203 reform provisions. And one of the things that we found, at least in the past, is that people who have been deemed by the appointing officer to not to be of good moral character or not to meet the psychological standards, there's not a uniform way that is being handled throughout the state by the personnel directors. And I believe that the Department of Civil Service does not tell personnel directors how to handle that. So in some cases, the personnel directors will remove that person from the civil service list, but we've heard in many other circumstances that is not done. So if you have someone that doesn't pass, the new requirements for background and psychological pursuant to these regulations, I'm wondering if you've had any conversations with state civil service, because it would seem to me that those people should be removed from the eligible list, because otherwise the appointing officer, sheriff or chief, is going to have a rule of 2 instead of a rule of 3 or a rule of 1, depending on how many people are knocked off the list or could be knocked off because of their not meeting these requirements under these new regulations. So it's great to have those, and I think a lot of sheriffs would really appreciate that. But if we can't take them off the civil service list, it really inhibits the ability to hire qualified people.
Tom, if I could just jump in for a second. So I think that this is something, first of all, I think you've nailed one of the reasons why we feel that this is necessary and why this in fact was in place, that there was no standard definition of good moral character. So hopefully this will, assist with that. I understand your issue with regard to civil service, and we plan on having further, conversations with civil service regarding this and sharing this information with them that will hopefully assist in the issue that you're addressing.
Okay, thank you. I think that'd be very helpful. I know it would be the sheriffs. I obviously can't speak for the chiefs, but in our conversations, we've had some chiefs on the call, and I think that it would be helpful to every police employer.
Yes, thank you. Yes, the medical and physical fitness standards are supposed to be followed by the civil service folks, that's for sure. So I do think that a lot of the work that's gone into this will help define and make those definitions better defined for them with what you just talked about. So thanks for bringing that up. Are there any other concerns or questions we need to discuss?
I would just also like to just acknowledge real quick to Tom's point. Very, it's a really good point, Tom. Understood. I mean, we've seen it. I've seen it in my prior career. Understood. I think it's clearly a civil service issue to act on ultimately, as far as the removal from people from lists. So I've heard it long and far as well. I don't think it fits exactly in these regs. I don't think we have the authority to do that right in here, but definitely subsequent conversations with civil service are in order. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Any further discussion?
In that vein, I think that for smaller counties, this will affect the hiring process, and I think that there's going to have to probably be changes to civil service to be able to get enough candidates to even field the list. So, and I'm certainly not wanting to water down the standards, but just saying that it will definitely impact smaller counties' ability to formulate and have a viable list of candidates too. So, and the only other question I had was, so in the process, I think Josh, maybe you might have mentioned it, where in the process this is this at the civil service level for I know they always have done the medical and they've done the physical fitness, but will the psychological and the polygraph be at that level, or will it be at next at the agency level, or isn't that designated in that I was looking to see if I could see that?
The psychological will be at the agency level when an offer is made to the candidate, and that's in compliance basically with the American Disabilities Act, as well as the medical portion of it. The EDA prevents an agency from identifying a disability pre-offer, and the medical is further defined in the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission as including psychological assessment as well. So those would have to be post offer.
Okay, Chief, you all set? Chief Parisi, are you all set with that?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yep, thank you. Thank you. Any other concerns or questions? Okay, hearing none, would someone want to make and read the motion, please?
I'll be happy to do that. The motion is to adopt the amendments as proposed to NYCRR Part 6000 Medical and Physical Fitness Standards and Procedures for Police Officer Candidates.
Thank you. And do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? So hearing none, let's vote. Dr. Klofus, your vote?
Yes.
Dr. McBride?
Yes.
Chief Parisi?
Yes.
And my vote is yes as well. So the motion passes, and thank you, Commissioner, and Johanna, and Josh, and Michael, and everyone that's participated in this discussion. Thank you all very much for all the work on this.
Thank you.
We now move to informational and updates on regulations. Natasha, you're up.
Natasha, you're on mute.
Trying to advise you guys. Here I am on mute. For the past couple of years, our use of force regs, as you know, were adopted on an emergency basis. So now they have been permanently adopted, and they went into effect on March 31st of this year. So they're good to go. And if you don't remember what those were, those regs implemented Executive Law Section 837T, which requires the chiefs of police, county sheriffs, and the state police to report all use of force incidents. And there you have it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Natasha.
You're welcome.
And next on the informational update is the school resource officer training curriculum that Molly Bates will discuss. Go ahead, Molly.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the council. I just want to provide a brief update on the status of the school resource officer curriculum development. Staff has been working with a panel of subject matter experts from both the law enforcement and education communities to develop a standardized SRO curriculum for New York State. We're in the final stages of development and have 2 planned pilots scheduled for the summer. They're going to be held in conjunction with the New York State Sheriff's Association in Steuben and Saratoga counties. Proposed broad topics in this curriculum include, but are not limited to, the roles and responsibilities of the SRO, school safety planning, community engagement, understanding adolescent development, special needs students, legal issues, and communication skills. So hopefully we'll get a bunch of feedback from our pilots and anticipate a fall presentation to the council for adoption. That's it. Any questions?
Okay, very good. No, I'm hearing all good things, Molly, about that.
Good. Good. Thanks.
And if I could, I just wanted to thank, we've been working with the Sheriff's Association to do some of the pilots. So we just want to thank their partnership to be willing to host us for that. So, which will be great.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's something coming up in Bath and then something in Saratoga County, I believe. So,
yeah, I think so.
Yes.
okay, very good. Thank you, Molly. Now we turn to new business. I do have one thing on new business that I had brought up to Josh before. Several of the meetings I've been at recently regarding training has to do with the A-RIDE training that the GTSC is involved in. The idea that there should be some certificate of training that could be offered through DCJS through their system or something like that. If there's any way that something like that could be done, there are different. I had a couple of sheriffs and a couple of chiefs actually tell me that they'd like their officers to be able to have that to produce to a district attorney or something on the importance of the A-RIDE training, something more than what exists apparently. I don't know if Josh, if you had time to look into that or not, but I had mentioned I was going to bring that up.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, we did have some time to look into it. More to come, but high level staff spoke with Governor Traffic Safety Committee. They're the primary ones that deliver the A-RIDE training. They do have records of individuals who have completed A-RIDE. They do issue training certificates for A-RIDE. In order to get the A-RIDE training onto the police and peace officer registry, as you mentioned, the best process, and speaking with yourself, we talked about a little bit, and also with GTSC, would be to have GTSC present the A-RIDE program to the Municipal Police Training Council for adoption by the council. And that would allow then the anytime the training is conducted to be uploaded to our central police and peace officer registry for individuals to receive an Mptc certificate for the successful completion of A-RIDE training. Now, that would also require the council to establish instructor requirements for that course as well. Currently, for A-RIDE training, instructors may not necessarily be general topics instructors who are conducting that training. Some may be, some may not. So we know, as we know in regulations, it requires at minimum an individual to be a general topics instructor in order to have training added to the police registry and training records. So we would have to have some discussion on that to determine what standard instructor requirement would need to be established. But that's something we can go back to GTSC and discuss their interest in potentially having the council adopt A-RIDE training as a training standard and for the issuance of Mptc certificates, and to go and to have that reflected on the officer's training record. Now, in the meantime, if an officer is missing the A-RIDE certificate for courtroom presentation or for courtroom testimony or documentation, they can certainly reach out to GTSC. They have a list of everybody who has completed A-RIDE training that they've delivered the training for, and they can reissue a training certificate for that individual if they're missing it or need another copy. So you could certainly have further discussions with GTSC and entertain the idea of potentially presenting A-RIDE to the council at subsequent meetings for adoption.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for looking into that, Josh, and the explanation. Appreciate it. Any other council member have any new business they want to discuss?
Bruce McBride, one of the items brought up in both in the materials and in the presentations was reorganizing or adding members to both the Mptc and also to the Accreditation Council. What is the time frame for that? If anybody knows.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's one of the provisions that takes effect 6 months after the bill was signed. And that's something we're actively working on right now with the governor's appointments office.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else with any new business? Okay, hearing none, thank you all very much for all your participation today. There was a lot of business that was covered, that's for sure. And all the committees and all the staff that have been involved with all the hours that go into this. It was a lot of work, and we appreciate it very much. Our next meeting is September 1st, 2021. And it remains to be seen whether it'll be virtual or in person at this time, but time will tell. So if there are no further business to bring forward, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
I make
moved.
a motion to adjourn.
Okay, we have a motion by Dr. McBride, second by Dr. Clofus. Dr. Clofus, how's your vote?
Yes.
Dr. McBride?
Yes.
Chief Parisi?
Yes.
And myself as well. And again, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Thank you so much, Josh, for coordinating the meeting and all the staff. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, everybody.
So long.
Have a good afternoon.
Okay, no.